I've been to my share of corporate functions before, but the Aurum Labs Gala had its own brand of performance. Everything in that lobby looked like it had been arranged to int asterisk mid-8. Polished marble floors that clicked under every expensive shoe, suspended sculptures made of glass and brass that caught the light like they were showing off, and a half-dozen photographers stationed at strategic points to make you feel important, whether you wanted to or not. I was there as the plus one. Not a title I was used to. Usually, I was the one bringing Serene along to client dinners or gallery nights, but this was her domain. She was the brand director for Aurum Labs, which meant she knew half the room personally and the other half by reputation. I run a workshop that designs and builds custom interiors for events and installations, good work, solid reputation, but nothing that lands you in biotech circles unless your spouse works there. Serene had been busy since we walked in, switching between smiles and whispers with other execs. I tried to be the polite accessory, the man in the tailored suit who knows when to nod and when to step back. While we were in the lobby waiting for the guest introductions to begin, she leaned against the reception counter to check her phone. Her clutch was half tucked under her arm, the kind with a snap clasp that pops open if you look at it the wrong way. And that's exactly what happened. It slipped just enough for the contents to shift. Out of habit more than curiosity, I glanced down. Lipstick tube, compact mirror, a sleek company-issued badge, and a keycard. Glossy white with gold lettering. On it, Penthouse 2403. Just below that, the initials N. Hail. I've never been great at hiding my thoughts, but I tried. My eyes probably stayed on it half a second too long before she caught the look. Without missing a beat, she clicked the clutch shut and straightened. Her expression was unreadable, neutral, maybe slightly amused, but her posture tightened, just enough for me to notice. Before I could even think of asking, the overhead lights dimmed a little. Someone called for everyone to move toward the main hall. Serene slid her hand into the crook of my arm as if nothing had happened, pulling me into the current of suited bodies and glittering gowns. The main ballroom was all polished surfaces and strategic lighting, gold against deep charcoal, with towering arrangements of white orchids that looked too perfect to be real. As we found our table, the giant screen at the far end of the room lit up with a series of names and faces. Each guest of note got a brief caption, credentials, achievements, the kind of polite flattery you can fit in a sentence. Then my face appeared. Not one of my better hedge *TS, but that wasn't the issue. The caption read something that made no sense professionally, but was clearly meant as a jab, a mocking in-joke I wasn't in on. There was a ripple of laughter from a table nearby. I looked at Serene, expecting maybe a raised eyebrow, a half apology. Instead, she laughed too, louder than the rest. "Oh, that's the contractors doing," she said with a dismissive wave. "They're forever mixing up files. And that keycard? Oh, that's just some silly prop from the events team, probably leftover from last quarter's promo shoot. You know how they are." I didn't remember mentioning the keycard out loud, but the way she threw it into the same breath as the screen caption felt deliberate, like sweeping two different messes into the same dustpan before anyone could see them separately. Before I could form a reply, she pivoted. "But what is worth talking about is the agency's signage fail," she said, her voice carrying just enough for the neighboring tables to catch. "You saw the photos, right? Wrong logo size, wrong tagline, absolutely rookie mistake." And just like that, the oxygen in the conversation shifted. Heads turned toward her, people started weighing in on the supposed blunder, and I was no longer the point of focus. Even the laughter about my caption faded into murmurs about fonts and print deadlines. I played along, smiled when someone sympathized with how awkward that must be for the agency, nodded when a man in a silver tie suggested they'd lose the contract over it. Outwardly, I was the agreeable husband, happy to let his wife lead the room. Inwardly, I was rewinding the last 5 minutes in slow motion. It wasn't just that she had an explanation ready, it was how complete it was. The caption was a contractor's mix-up. The keycard was a harmless prop. The real story, the one everyone should be talking about, was some other department's screw-up. Each deflection layered over the last until there was no gap for a follow-up question. And it worked. Not just on them, on me too if I'm being honest. At least for the moment. When someone can redirect a room that smoothly, you almost start to doubt whether you saw what you saw. But I know what I saw in her clutch. And I know whose initials those were. The rest of the introductions blurred together. Faces, names, applause at the right moments. Every so often, Serene would lean in to whisper a quick comment. Always about someone else, never about us, and certainly not about what had just happened. She moved through that room like a conductor, guiding the rhythm without ever letting on how much she was directing. I stayed quiet, storing every detail like I was tucking it into my own mental file. Her laugh was just a fraction too quick when she dismissed the caption. Her tone a shade too casual when she called the keycard a prop. The way she didn't wait for anyone to respond before steering into the agency story. I didn't press her. Not there. Not with the COO himself somewhere in the room and 100 pairs of eyes waiting to see who we'd talk to next. But in my gut, something had shifted. It wasn't just suspicion. It was the awareness that if there was something to hide, Serene had already rehearsed how to hide it. And that, I realized, might be more dangerous than whatever the truth actually was. On the ride from the ballroom to the mezzanine lounge, I told myself to let it go. Be the easygoing husband. Congratulate the VP who just won an industry award. Keep my smile laminated. Serene thrives when her world is polished. I can play along for a few hours, I thought. But once a thread loosens, your hands go to it again and again, even when you swear you won't pull. That thread wasn't new. It had been weaving through our last few months like fishing line. Clear until it catches the light. The first glint was the second phone. A matte black slab that lived face down on her nightstand. Always quiet. Always at 10%. When I asked, she said it was a work-only line for vendors. Fair. Except vendors apparently never called, never texted, never lit the screen with anything but a clock. It wasn't the lack of noise that bothered me. It was the way she positioned it, haloed by nothing, like a relic in a museum that you can't touch and aren't supposed to notice. Then location sharing glitched. One evening I opened the map to see if I should start dinner, and her dot disappeared. She laughed it off. An iOS update, permissions, the usual tech gobbledygook. I'm not a conspiracy guy, so I shrugged and cooked pasta. The next week, the sharing was back, until 2 Fridays later when it went dark again, conveniently aligned with a strategy retreat she scheduled with a few senior leaders. I didn't push. I told myself trust means accepting that privacy isn't a crime, that adults don't need to broadcast their coordinates to prove love. Those retreats multiplied. Their timing seemed welded to Nate Hale's calendar. Denver in March, Santa Barbara in April, a quick overnight in the city even though their headquarters is already there. She started wearing travel athleisure to bed the night before, like she wanted her suitcase to see how serious she was. I'd offer to drive her to the airport. She'd say rideshare was better. Twice. She came home with a tiny hotel-branded pen tucked into her tote. Souvenirs, I guess. Or muscle memory. I'm not proud of how the receipts showed up. I didn't snoop in her purse. I found them in our shared expense folder because she forwarded a batch to me for tax categorization. My small workshop bills run through the same software we use for household stuff. The PDF bundle included dinners coded to vendor meetings, but the restaurants weren't on Orem's approved list. One was a dimly lit place with 6 tables and a sommelier who pairs the octopus with a story. Another, a rooftop bar known less for networking and more for views you're supposed to kiss under. If this was vendor work, the vendors were romantic and extremely thirsty. Then there was the influencer event report. She asked me to skim it for layout notes. My shop has built staging for Orem before, so this wasn't weird. The deck talked about swag tiers, guest flow, a showstopper photo moment. In the email chain, though, a stray attachment lurked. An invoice from a boutique hotel that shared the event's date. Double room, premium corner, king bed. It wasn't addressed to Serene personally. It hit the brand office cost center. Maybe a guest room for a VIP that never showed. Maybe a line item that assumes no one reads footnotes. Around the same time, our front porch camera discovered its inner philosopher and decided to contemplate existence. Maintenance mode, every time she came home late. Logs blank as fresh snow. I work with contractors. I know systems hiccup, but systems don't develop a sense of occasion. They don't fail only on nights that smell like bergamot and bar smoke. They don't return to perfect health the next morning the way guilt sleeps hard and wakes early. None of this alone was conviction. It was fog on a mirror, but I could trace the outline of a face with my finger. I kept waiting for the one ordinary explanation that would redeem everything at once. I even tried to manufacture it for her, asked about vendor dinners, about why a boutique hotel would appear on an event budget, about whether IT had fixed the app that kept eating her location. Each time she had language ready. Not truth language. The kind of sentences that call a fire thermal variance and then ask if you want sparkling or still. We still had our routines. Sunday grocery runs where she vetoed my cereal choices on sugar grounds. Weekday coffees left steaming on my workbench with a sticky note that said, "Drink me." She still texted me reels of golden retrievers who lose chess to toddlers. She still kissed me on the way out the door. Quick, efficient, practiced. If you're wondering why I didn't confront her squarely, the answer is stupid. I loved my wife and I loved the version of our life where she was who she said she was. Raisins look like chocolate chips if you want cookies badly enough. I also had skin in Orem's game. My shop was mid-contract building modular scenic walls for a product demo series. If the brand office soured on me, I'd eat the costs. So I let myself be useful. I drafted mood boards, sketched layouts, kept my head down. When Serene asked if I could come to the gala a bit early to help the event's team judge sightlines, I said yes. She texted a thank you emoji and a star. I still have that thread. Felt generous at the time. Now it reads like an RSVP to my own education. Sometimes I'd catch a detail and then gaslight myself before anyone else could. She wore a new perfume, warmer than her usual citrus. Amber. Maybe sandalwood with a whisper of smoke. A grown-up scent. She said the brand gifted it to her after a campaign. Sure. Except she'd spritz it just before late meetings. And it would still be clinging to our sheets the next morning, faint as a rumor. I told myself fragrances linger. They do. So does what brings them home. And the work phone, that monkish rectangle, turned devout at strange hours. I woke at 2 a.m. one night to get water and found it on the kitchen counter, face up for once, its screen glowing with a calendar notice that vanished before I could read the title. Serene stepped in behind me, soft voice, softer hand on my back. "Can't sleep?" she asked, and I said no, and we stood there in the refrigerator light like two actors who forgot their lines. She picked up the phone, thumbed it dark, and smiled like we'd caught a moth and set it free. There were other tiny edits to reality. A tan line that didn't match the outfits she'd worn the week before. A silk blouse she never washed at home, always dropped at the cleaner at lunch. A glancing, almost ceremonial way she said Nate's name in conversations, neutral, professional, while never quite meeting my eyes when she did. If coincidence were a currency, we could have retired early. If there's a part of me you might judge, it's the part that tried to normalize the statistics. People make mistakes. Corporate life is lonely in a crowded way. Proximity is a solvent. I gave myself all the reasonable speeches. Then I'd remember the initials N. Hale printed on that keycard like a stamp on wax, and my throat would go dry again. I don't think Serene is cruel. That's the knot I keep returning to. She's strategic. She speaks fluent room. She believes in momentum and narratives and how to tilt both. If she crossed a line, I doubt it began with malice. It began with a hallway, a calendar block, a laugh that held a little too long. The part that stings isn't just what she might have done. It's how easily she could make me feel petty for noticing. So I told myself I'd wait for clarity. Not a blow-up, not a scene, just a clean edge to the blur. Something that would let me choose a direction and live with it. That night at the gala, as we floated from introductions to toasts, as she collected congratulations like glossy shells, I felt the fog thinning. I didn't know what was coming yet. Only that, this time, if the thread came loose again, I'd stop pretending I didn't feel it against my palm. The gala wound down in the way most black tie things do. Too much champagne? Polite handshakes that last a beat too long, and everyone pretending they aren't checking their phones for rideshare ETAs. By the time the clock brushed past 11, Serene was still orbiting conversations with the same poise she'd had all night, her dress catching the light like she'd been born under a spotlight. I'd already helped the events crew with some last-minute staging earlier in the evening, running a couple of uplights to the balcony rail, hauling floral stands out of the way before the dessert course, and for that, one of the tech leads had given me a temporary login for the venue's vendor portal. It was supposed to be for decor adjustments, floor plans, lighting cues, loading dock schedules. I wasn't supposed to have access to anything else. But sometimes doors aren't locked the way they should be. Near midnight, with Serene somewhere in the crush of people by the bar, I found a quiet corner at the edge of the mezzanine. My phone screen glowed pale blue as I navigated to the guest access logs. A curiosity, I told myself, just checking how tightly they controlled penthouse entry during these events. But curiosity has a way of knowing exactly where it wants to go. The records were neat columns. Timestamps, card IDs, assigned names. My eyes scanned lazily until they snagged on 2 consecutive entries. 11:42 and 13 seconds p.m. Card hashtag 2403NH. Hale, Nathaniel. 11:43 and 5 seconds p.m. Card hashtag 2403SC. Cole, Serene. Less than a minute apart, both bound for the penthouse floor. I stared at the screen, my thumb frozen. The first instinct was to explain it away, coincidence, a quick brand team check-in, maybe a board-level toast. Except the event schedule listed no programming up there after 8, and I knew the penthouse wasn't just a hospitality suite. It was Hale's preferred private space. The initials on my wife's card weren't for show. They matched the format for authorized users. Before I could decide what to do with that, my phone buzzed with an incoming file. It was from Drew, the corporate photographer I'd worked with on the stage design earlier in the week. We'd swapped numbers to coordinate his lighting cues, and he'd mentioned sending me a few behind-the-scenes sh*ts for my portfolio. Got some raw ones you might like, the message read. I opened the attachment. 27 images. Unedited. The kind photographers capture when no one's posing. Most were harmless. Waitstaff adjusting trays, the AV team huddled over the soundboard, a wide sh*t of the main floor. Then, in the middle of the set, 2 frames froze me in place. A mirrored service corridor. The light there was dim, tinted amber by sconces along the wall. In the reflection, Serene stood close to Nate Hale. His arm was around her waist. Her hand rested on his lapel. Their faces were angled toward each other. Not quite kissing, but close enough that the glass between them seemed to hum with it. I checked the metadata. 11:43 and 22 seconds p.m. I flicked back to the access logs on my other tab. Hale's card. 11 hours 42 minutes and 13 seconds. Serene's. 11 hours 43 minutes and 5 seconds. The photo. 11 hours 43 minutes and 22 seconds. 20 seconds after she'd stepped off the elevator. The precision hit me harder than the image itself. There was no plausible gray area left. No, we just bumped into each other. Or, we were looking at something on his phone. The entries and the pictures were a synchronized clock ticking down to something I didn't want to watch. For a long moment, I just sat there in that shadowed corner, phone in hand, watching the screen dim and brighten as if it, too, couldn't look for long. The hum of the party carried on behind me. Laughter, clinking glassware, the low pulse of whatever jazz fusion the band had shifted into for the late crowd. None of it felt connected to me anymore. I could have walked right up to them then. I could have taken my own photo, let the flash burst like a flare in the corridor. But that would have been spectacle, and spectacle is Serene's medium. She knows how to twist a room to her angle, how to turn an accusation into a performance. If I wanted the truth to stand, it had to be documented, not dramatized. So I saved the files, both the logs and the photos, and sent them to a secure folder I kept for client contracts. The irony wasn't lost on me, that I was filing away my marriage alongside invoices and stage renderings. I rejoined the crowd just as Serene emerged from the direction of the elevators, a fresh glass of champagne in her hand. She spotted me, smiled the same polished smile she'd been offering all night, and threaded her arm through mine like nothing in the world could be wrong. "You disappeared," she said lightly. "Just checking on a lighting thing," I replied. keeping my voice even. She nodded, scanning the room for our next social obligation. Let's make the rounds before dessert. I let her guide me forward, my hand resting lightly at her back. From the outside, we were the image we'd always been, composed, complimentary, exactly what people expected to see. Inside, I was cataloging every step, every glance, the way her laugh rose and fell without touching her eyes. By the time the gala officially ended, I knew two things. 1. I had the kind of proof no explanation could erode. 2. If there was going to be a reckoning, it would happen on my terms, not in the heat of a ballroom where she could pretend it was all just another scene in the brand narrative she curated so well. When we finally left, the night air outside the venue was cool enough to bite. Serene slipped into the back seat of the car, tucking her dress under her legs, and asked the driver to stop for coffee on the way home. I said sure, staring out at the streetlights as they flickered past. In my pocket, my phone was a warm, weighty thing, proof, time-stamped and irrefutable, that the thread I'd been pulling had finally come loose in my hands. We didn't speak much on the ride home. She sipped her latte, scrolling through her phone with her thumb in that restless little circle she made when she was pretending to be absorbed in something. I watched the city slip past the window and thought about what I was holding in my pocket. Those logs, those photos, the tight little knot of time stamps that left no air for her to wriggle through. At home, she vanished upstairs under the pretense of taking off this dress before I spill coffee on it. I stayed in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, listening to her heels clack up the stairs. When her steps faded, I pulled my laptop from its case. The files slid from my phone into the cloud, double back to an encrypted drive, and then onto a flash stick I tucked into a small, nondescript envelope. It would have been easy to confront her then, right there in the hallway in front of our wedding photo. But Serene in a corner is a dangerous thing. She'd spin, deflect, maybe even cry, and somehow by the end of it I'd be apologizing for jumping to conclusions. I needed a setting where she couldn't play to an audience, where her SK*LL with a narrative wouldn't matter. And I needed allies. I thought of Harold Vance, a board member I'd met twice. Once at a holiday dinner, once in a planning session for an Orem pop-up exhibit my workshop had built. He was old guard corporate, more likely to wear a tie in his own living room than take off his cufflinks at his desk. He also had a reputation for despising internal scandals, especially ones that threatened investor confidence. And, as luck or fate would have it, Harold had been talking with Redwood Harbor, an activist fund pressing for tighter governance at Orem Labs. Redwood's senior partner, Lucinda Reyes, had toured my workshop last spring. She'd asked sharp questions about vendor compliance clauses, the sort that make you wonder if she's mentally underlining your answers. I remembered her interest in a specific line of my contract with Orem's brand division. A morality clause, tucked in like a splinter, stating that my services could be terminated without penalty if the brand office engaged in conduct that could cause reputational damage to Orem or its affiliates. By 1 a.m, both Harold and Lucinda had copies of the logs and the photos. My messages were measured, just enough detail to tie the timing to the gala and to Nate Hale's presence, with no speculation, just the hard edges of what was documented. I attached a scan of my contract page for Lucinda. Harold called back first. His voice the low rumble of someone who has just been handed the lever to move a mountain. "Ethan, I appreciate the discretion," he said. "You understand the sensitivity here." "I understand the stakes," I replied. Lucinda's response came by email, short, precise, a single line. "We'll act before market open." I don't know how she moved so quickly, but by 3:30 a.m. my phone buzzed again. A board meeting had been convened for 7 a.m. Emergency agenda. Harold would be present in person. Lucinda's team would dial in. I didn't sleep. I showered, shaved, put on the same charcoal suit I'd worn to the gala, and left the house without waking Serene. She'd asked no questions when she came down after changing last night, just hummed to herself as she loaded the dishwasher, as if we'd been nothing more than pleasantly tired from too much socializing. The meeting took place in Orem's top-floor conference room, a glass-walled space that looked out over the city like it owned it. By 7:05, Serene and Nate Hale had been suspended pending investigation. Legal was tasked with securing their devices, HR with locking their system access. The brand division would be placed under temporary external administration. Redwood had provided a shortlist for that role weeks ago, anticipating pushback on other governance issues. My name sat at the top, not because anyone thought I'd ever be in the running, but because of a plan I drafted after last year's PR scandal. A detailed proposal for repairing a public image shredded by poor crisis management. Harold slid the document across the table. Ethan already understands the workflows, he said, his tone all business. Minimal onboarding time. Existing vendor contract in good standing. No one disagreed. The vote was unanimous. By 8:45, a pass card with my name on it slid across the security desk toward me. By 9:15, I was sitting in the brand director's office, Serene's office, while the city hummed outside the window. Her chair was still adjusted to her height. I lowered it, feeling the hydraulic sigh. The photos of product launches she'd lined up along the credenza were gone, boxed by HR before I arrived. In their place, a stack of files waited for my signature. The top folder was legals, a termination package for gross misconduct. It was all there: access logs, photographs, vendor testimonies, the hotel room bill to Orum's account, even the influencer event invoice that had first stirred my suspicions. They'd even pulled records of off-site dinners categorized as vendor meetings that matched venues I'd already flagged in my mind. I signed. Twice for Hale, twice for Serene. My hand didn't shake. When I passed the folder back, the HR manager, a woman named Grace with eyes that missed nothing, gave the smallest nod. Effective immediately, she said. It wasn't triumph I felt. Not relief either. Just a steadying, like a boat righting itself after a wave passes. Outside the office, the building's rhythm went on. Emails pinged, printers hummed, someone laughed down the hall. But a quiet change had settled in the brand division, the kind that makes people glance over their shoulders before speaking. By noon, Serene's nameplate had been removed, her corporate pass deactivated. I didn't go home that night. I stayed late, combing through pending campaigns, flagging vendor contracts for review, and drafting a statement for when the internal memo would inevitably leak. At 11 p.m. I finally shut down the computer and sat in the darkened office, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the gala, about the moment the clutch had slipped open and shown me the first crack. How quickly I'd watched it spiderweb, and how, in the end, the collapse hadn't been loud. No shouting in a corridor, no scene in front of the board. Just paper, ink, and the slow turning of a key in a lock that no longer opened for her. By the time I left the building, the lobby security guard greeted me by name. I walked out into the cold night air, my steps unhurried. I had come into the gala as a +1, an accessory. I was leaving this week as something else entirely. Someone who had chosen his own ending, written it in his own hand, and refused to let anyone else tell the story for him. Morning light has a way of making everything look more honest than you're ready for. It came through the brand office windows at a sharp angle, hitting the glass table where Serene had once hosted her Monday status meetings. By 9:15 a.m., I was in her seat. No, my seat now, signing my name on memos she'd never imagined would cross my desk. It wasn't symbolic. It was procedural. The emergency board decision had made me the acting brand director, effective immediately. That meant full administrative access, emails, budgets, campaign approvals, vendor lists. The sheer volume of decisions stacked in front of me should have felt overwhelming. But after the night I'd had, it was grounding. The more I immersed myself in operational fires, the less space there was in my head for the personal ones. Grace from HR appeared at my doorway with 2 heavy binders and a thin manila folder. The binders were brand division compliance manuals. She'd already tabbed sections she thought I'd need to reference. The folder was legals. "This is the termination package," she said, setting it in front of me like she was placing a card on a poker table. I flipped it open. The evidence was stacked with the neat brutality only corporate counsel can produce. Keycard logs showing Serene and Nate Hale accessing the penthouse floor within 52 seconds of each other. Time-stamped photos from the service corridor, his arm around her waist. Contractor statements about seeing them leave together through an unmonitored exit later that night. Expense reports tying the penthouse suite to the corporate account, along with vendor meeting receipts from restaurants I knew had never hosted Orem business. That boutique hotel invoice, double room, premium corner, king bed, filed under the influencer events budget code. It was clinical. There were no adjectives, no editorializing. Just dates, times, amounts. The quiet violence of proof. My signature was required in 4 places. Twice for Hale, twice for Serene. Each line was labeled termination. Gross misconduct, reputational damage/conflict of interest. My pen didn't hesitate. When I passed the folder back, Grace closed it gently, as though handling something fragile. "We'll process this within the hour," she said. "Their system access is already revoked." That last part struck me harder than I expected. For all the moves Serene had made to control a narrative, she just lost her ability to even open her Orem inbox. It was like flipping a switch. One moment she was a central voice in every branding decision. The next she couldn't log in to see the week's press clippings. Around 10 a.m. Legal joined us to draft the internal communication. The memo was short, effective immediately. Both the COO and the brand director were no longer with the company. Interim leadership had been appointed. Operations would continue without disruption. No details, no speculation. Just enough to settle the room before the rumors started filling in the gaps. By noon, that memo hit the inboxes of Orem's 4,000 employees. I was in a vendor call when I noticed my phone light up with a string of unread messages from people I barely knew. Project managers, assistants, even a couple of interns. Most were just short lines. Saw the bulletin. Hang in there. You'll be good for the team. But there was another shift I could feel, one that wasn't written in any email. The same people who'd laughed too quickly at my expense during the gala, the caption on that big screen, the little digs that Serene had laughed off, were suddenly quieter around me. Not hostile, not exactly apologetic. Just quieter. Eye contact got shorter. Casual smiles faltered. They knew what had happened. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to realize that whatever had played out in the background last night had real consequences. And that the man they'd once seen as an accessory to Serene's career was now sitting in her chair. By mid-afternoon, Grace confirmed the terminations had been executed. Their corporate passes were deactivated, benefits suspended, stock grants frozen pending review. Somewhere in the building, facilities was boxing up Serene's personal items. Photos from product launches, a branded notebook with her initials. The ridiculous crystal paperweight she used to joke was more expensive than my first car. I imagined her phone vibrating as the lockout hit, the small flicker of confusion before realization set in. That moment she'd know she wasn't just on leave, wasn't being investigated, but that the access, the role, the influence, all of it was gone. If she was angry, I didn't see it. Serene didn't come to the office. She didn't call me. She didn't try to storm the boardroom and defend herself. That wasn't her style. Her strength had always been in controlling the frame before anyone realized they were in a picture. But the board's move had been too fast, too clean. There'd been no space to work her angles. I kept my head down, buried in onboarding notes and vendor calls. The work helped. The office still smelled faintly of her perfume. Amber and something sweet, but the more I layered over it with coffee and printer ink, the less it clung. It wasn't until later, after the building emptied out, that I let myself really feel the weight of the day. I stood at the window, looking out over the city lights, and thought about how quickly the balance had shifted. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been a +1 at her event. Now I was the one holding the keys, literally, in the form of the brass office set that Grace had slid across the table to me that morning. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about justice, not in the dramatic sense. It was about making a choice. Serene had made hers in the shadowed corridor outside the penthouse. I made mine in the clear light of day, at a conference table with my nameplate in front of me. When I finally left the office that night, the cleaning crew was working its way down the hall. One of them, a man who'd been at Orem longer than most executives, looked up from emptying a bin and nodded at me. Not a smile, not a question, just a small acknowledgement. I nodded back. Out on the street, the air was cool, the kind that feels sharper after a long day under fluorescent lights. I didn't rush to the subway. For the first time in months, maybe longer, I wasn't moving to someone else's schedule. Tomorrow would bring press questions, vendor meetings, a dozen fires to put out. But tonight, I walked home slowly, letting the city move around me. Every step measured, every breath deliberate. Serene had been right about one thing. In branding, perception is everything. But for the first time in this marriage, I didn't need her to manage mine.